Well, now we've seen how one property gets set up inside of our code. Let's talk a little bit about variations in the browsers themselves. As I said before, CSS3 is still in a draft state, which means it is changing. And in order for the browsers to be able to implement some of these features while it's in drafts mode, what they've done is they've added a prefix to the feature so that that feature will work with that specific browser. At the time I'm recording this, almost all of our updated modern browsers support the shadow feature. But some of the versions of the older browsers require these presets in order for the shadow feature to work. And one of them would be the older versions of Safari and Chrome. Now let's take a look at how I would set up this property using the prefix so that we target those specific browsers. When I go in and set up the box shadow property itself, that's going to work for all the browsers with the completed CSS3 standard. Let's go ahead and set up one for instance, the WebKit browsers. What I'll do is inside of our document, I'm going to copy the statement we used to create the shadow that we'd built before. I'll go ahead and paste it in a line above the original property. And at the very beginning, I'm just going to add something to it. I'm going to add dash WebKit, then dash, and we'll finish it out with box shadow. Now what we have here is two controls performing the same function. The box shadow property will be addressed by any of the modern browsers that have the completed CSS3 standard implemented. But the early Safari browsers and Chrome browsers don't support this property. They support the -WebKit-box shadow property. So we include both, and that way our drop shadow will look proper on both sets of browsers. As you might guess, this can add a lot of lines of code to our CSS document, but it's important to do this to make sure that your document looks good on the most number of browsers possible. In the case of the box shadow property, only the WebKit browsers have a different property name. But for some of the other properties, you may have to set up a prefix for each browser category that you want to target, and that can be 4 or 5 lines of code. So one thing that you'll want to do is keep track of the CSS3 standard as it's updated and changed. When it does make it to the final revision, there may be times when we can take this line of code and completely remove it. But, for instance, in this case, if we want to support those older Chrome browsers, we're going to leave it in for a while. Now, there is some good news I can give you on how to set these browsers up and how to keep track of it. There's some great website resources out there for web developers like us that have been set up so that you can just simply look these items up. And one of them I'd like to show you right now is I'll go over to a bookmark I have set up for a CSS3 generator. And as you can see, this is at css3generator.com. And this was put up by a guy named Randy Jensen as a resource that any web developer can use. I'll basically go to their pull-down menu, and I'll choose the new CSS3 feature that I want to set up, in this case, box shadow. And what Randy's done is he's set up a really nice interactive display where I can go through and choose each one of the properties. We've got form elements that represent each part of the property, and all I have to do is fill in what I want. Let me build up the same one that we were working with before. I've got 10 for the horizontal and vertical offset, 10 for the blur radius, and 0 for the spread, and then I'll use a hexadecimal color and just add in something for medium gray. You can see a preview of what my shadow is going to look like right over here, and if it's what you want, you can just scroll down to the bottom. And what you'll notice is that they've already provided the code that you would need in your CSS document to create this shadow. We can see that we have the box shadow down here. And then, of course, we have the WebKit box shadow for the Safari and the Chrome browsers. Up at the top, you'll see a nice little overlay that shows you exactly which browsers are supported by this feature. And if any of these other browsers needed to have a different property name with a prefix installed, we would see it down in the code block here as well. Now, they do a pretty good job of keeping up with updates to the CSS3 standard, but it's not a bad idea to check up on it yourself. If you like the code, you can just click in this code box down here. That will copy it to your clipboard. Then you can go back to your document, create yourself a style, and I'll just paste it on in. And there you can see we're getting both lines of code dropped into our CSS document for use. I'll take them back out since we already had ours set up. Now that does a pretty good job of covering the majority of the browsers out there. But there's one more problem browser that you're probably going to have to deal with as an HTML5 designer. And that, of course, is our Explorer browser. The current version that's out on the market right now is version 9. And when we talk about CSS3, that is actually the only Explorer browser that supports any of these CSS3 features. So we really do have to think of any of our users that are going to be viewing our website with any previous browsers to Explorer 9. And that's a lot of users out there. So we need something special to handle that. Luckily for us, there's some JavaScript code that's been published that will allow older Explorer browsers and some of the other older versions of browsers to show HTML5 and CSS3 without having to be updated by our users. Now I want to go back and show you how we can insert this code into our document. So what I'm going to do is go up to the top here, and somewhere in the head, I'm going to add in a call to a JavaScript file. We'll add a script tag, and we'll set the source equal to a web address where this code is located. That's going to be http://html5shiv.googlecode.com. We're going to use a slash, and we're going to go to svn/trunk/html5.js. Now, of course, I'm going to close up my script tag. And we've told our document to go out and include this HTML shiv code, html5.js. This code will actually allow us to load HTML5 and CSS3 ready code into an older browser and still have it rendered properly. Now we need to do something else because, of course, our other browsers don't need this code since they support the HTML5 and CSS3 natively. So we're going to add something special around it just for the Internet Explorer browsers. And what we'll add are called conditional comments. Now, the first thing we do is add a comment so that the rest of the browsers will skip over this code. So right below the title and above that script line, I'm going to add the characters for a typical HTML comment. That's !!!. And then I'll go down and add another one that's below the script line. What we do is we embed our conditional statements inside the comments. So let me go to the first one, and to create a conditional statement that Internet Explorer will see, we use this square brackets. And inside there, I'll write a little code that will check to see if our browser is 9 or above. I'll write if, then LT for less than. We'll use capital IE for the Internet Explorer browser, and then we specify 9 as the version that we're most interested in. I'll close my square brackets. And then down at the bottom, I need another little piece of code, which I'll add right after the exclamation point and before the last dash dash. We'll need another set of square brackets, and this one is going to include the words "and if," spelled out as all one word. I'll close my square brackets, and now we've added our conditional comment code. So the way this reads, if our browser is Internet Explorer and less than 9, which means 6, 7, or 8 usually, it will then execute this line of code, loading up our HTML5.js file from the HTML5 shiv folder, and then after that we have an end if to close the statement off. Now I don't have any Internet Explorer browsers loaded onto the Mac I'm using for my recording, so I can't show you this, but you can take your page and test it inside of some older Internet Explorer browsers. What you'll find is that some, not all, of the HTML5 and CSS3 features that you include on your pages will render correctly, even if your user is using an older Internet Explorer browser.